Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and today I am joined by my friend Anna, who is here with us, and she runs the page on Instagram KeyToOCD. And we met through Instagram, and it's been a really exciting thing for us to plan this. And I've really been interested in getting to know her story and where she comes from on the scope of anxiety and OCD. And she's here to answer my questions and also raise awareness to OCD. So, once again, this is a disclaimer. We are not medical professionals. We're not therapists. Nobody in that realm. We're just two people who have experienced OCD for quite some time, and we're here to share our story. So, if you are struggling, please seek help from a medically trained professional.
Mhm.
So, without further ado, Anna, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
I'm excited, and that was a mouthful. I just realized that was,
You crushed
I
it.
just took a breath there,
I
but,
would have been stuttering the whole time. You nailed it.
well, I'm glad you're here, and I think it's cool because I'm getting to meet so many people through starting this podcast, especially on social media, Instagram, TikTok,
Mm,
and you're one of the first people that I've met on Instagram and who's also been really gracious enough to lend me your time and be open enough to come up and on this podcast and chat. And I guess for starters, for people who are listening to your story, could you give us a little bit of a background on you and your experience with anxiety and OCD?
yeah, definitely. So I was diagnosed with OCD in 2010, but
Mhm.
now that I understand what it is, how to cope with it, how to deal with it, I probably have had it for longer. Um, and I never really was an anxious kid, I would say. I wouldn't say that's the first word to describe me, but there's certain um things that I remember going through as a young child, and I'm like, okay, now that I have OCD, that kind of makes sense. um
Yeah.
so now, I mean, it's, you can relate. It's something that affects your every single day life, and I was just really inspired by an account to start an OCD um, page, whether it's just like a place for people to connect with one another, or give some tips and tricks that have helped me. Again, I'm not a professional, but I love to
Mhm.
just talk to people because I personally don't have anyone in my life that also has OCD that I know of. Um, and it's been a ton of fun. Like, I've been loving connecting to the community. My page has been growing pretty fast. Um, and obviously I met you, and I've been wanting to do something like a podcast or just speak more on the topic. Um, so yeah, it's been great. It's been a great way to kind of deal with something that's so challenging and like connect with others. I think that's the most important thing.
Social media, and I was just talking to my friend Sean about this last week, how social media kind of made me learn so much about
Mm,
myself and my OCD just by watching other accounts and kind of seeing how other people portray their OCD on social media. And it makes you like realize, okay, when I was younger, I wasn't so like, I really wasn't alone in a lot of the feelings and like things that I did
definitely.
because you start to see all these people who had very similar experiences. And so I think from my perspective here, listening to kind of how you were diagnosed over it's almost 15 years ago.
Yeah,
And
crazy.
thinking about that, it's like, do you remember, was there any like moment in your childhood that you can recall where OCD was kind of prevalent
Like before.
before you were
So
diagnosed?
Oh yeah. So, I mean, there's a reason why I got diagnosed and why I eventually was seeking help. But yeah, I've been through a few different subtypes. One of my first ones was contamination OCD, which is, I mean, it's just washing your hands until they get so dry that they're bleeding. And
Mhm.
I've never heard of someone, I've heard of the hand washing, and like, I remember wanting to shower like 3 times a day, but I actually didn't do it because I would be like, my family would be like, what is going on with you?
Yeah.
Um, But I've never heard of someone having the same type of contamination OCD that I've had, because aside from hand washing, which is very common, I used to constantly change my clothes. My mind would remind me, like, or tell me, hey, your clothes aren't clean, something's going to happen. And I
Mhm.
actually would like change my clothes, or sometimes I would, even if I were just home, I would change my clothes inside out. um it's interesting how OCD is just so unique for every person, right? Like
Mhm.
there's common, parts. Again, I've heard the hand washing thing many times, but I've never heard of
Sure.
someone turning their clothes inside out. um
That's so
so
interesting.
it's like, how did we come up with this? But
Wow.
yeah, it was really bad. Luckily, it didn't really affect my day to day too much. I remember at school, doing the things like counting my steps and walking a few feet and then having to kind of redo it.
Mhm.
And obviously trying to not be noticed doing that, because people
Mhm.
would be like, what is she doing?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, a lot of it happened at home. And it was pretty much between that and the checking theme, which when it came to be around age like 16, that was when I started to like, um over the summer, for example, I would my parents were like, you can go to bed whenever you want, you're a teenager now, like whatever. And so it was kind of my responsibility to I was the last one to go to bed, so it was kind of my responsibility to like make sure the door's locked, make sure the dog's in her crate, make sure the stove is off, even though we didn't even cook that night.
Yeah.
Um,
I get it. I get it.
so between the checking stuff and the contamination stuff, like feeling like my pajamas aren't clean or whatever, I literally would be up doing compulsions like that until 3 or 4 in the morning, a lot of nights.
Wow.
And yeah, obviously at the time, I really didn't think much of it because, as you know, everybody kind of gets intrusive thoughts.
Mhm.
Everybody thinks twice at some point in their life of like, oh, did I turn the stove off? Did I lock the door? I should double check that.
Sure.
But obviously, again, it got to a point where it's like, this is not healthy.
Mhm.
You need to be sleeping at 3 a.m.
Mhm.
when you're 16. So yeah, that's kind of how it started for me
Wow.
before I was diagnosed. Yep.
So 2000, we're the same age, right? You're
Yeah,
94?
29. Yep.
Yeah. So that means you were 16 in 2010. And okay, so up until that point, you have had quite a few years under your belt of kind of going through these compulsions and kind of dealing with
Definitely.
these things. And it's interesting that you brought up the contamination thing because I that was one of the first things that I struggled with as well.
Really.
And yeah, I think mine was, it's so much easier. I feel like for OCD to be looked at from like a contamination standpoint, and it's like, oh yeah, you have OCD, like you're washing your hands a lot and
Mm,
picking your fingers or whatever it is.
yep.
And for you to have like one of those compulsions of like turning your clothes inside out, um, it's interesting because I don't know if these thoughts, like, I know thoughts kind of just like come out of nowhere and we don't really, they just happen, and then you're like, oh yeah, maybe I should do this or I shouldn't do this. And
Yeah.
it's funny how you brought that up because I remember thinking like, how did I think of this? Like, how did I get this in my head, and why am I doing this? Why am I touching this 8 times? And it's so interesting
Definitely.
to see it from that perspective. So do you ever feel like you questioned yourself, you know with all this
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, no, 1,000%, because I was seeing a therapist, and I guess now that I'm aware of, things you shouldn't do, such as compulsions, I guess this was kind of her giving me reassurance. But
Mhm.
the point is, she was telling me, like, if I have a thought of like, oh my gosh, I have to tap the wall 3 times or else my loved one is going to get sick, she was the
Yep.
one reminding me, like, you touching a wall has nothing to do with the fate of your loved one.
Right.
And I it seems so obvious, right? That's common
Mhm.
sense, but I genuinely had to be reminded of that because I was so convinced in my mind that I had the power and it was
Mhm.
all up to me.
Yeah.
Um, so,
It's
but
not
I totally agree with you.
Well, that's the thing. Um, it's not out of the ordinary to think like that when you have OCD.
Yeah.
That's a very prevalent thing, and I think for, a lot of people who are suffering with OCD and they have like this like magical thinking of like, oh, if I don't touch this, or if this doesn't happen, then something bad's going to happen, and you start to touch things or you start to act in a certain way, then what ends up happening is you're teaching your brain that you only feel safe when you act out these compulsions, which ends
Yes.
up
Yeah.
reiterating to yourself that it is you that's stopping these things from happening.
Exactly. And that's a huge part that I've learned of what OCD is, because there's still a huge, massive part of the population that hears that
Mhm,
and thinks, oh, yeah, I also go crazy if my books aren't color coordinated on the shelf, or I also need to do my dishes right away. And it's like, no, it's it's so much more than just intrusive thoughts and compulsions. It's, at least for me, it
mhm,
was lack of self-trust, feeling like I'm losing control, feeling like I don't know who I even am. And
mhm,
that's a huge part that people just don't understand. I think people and people that do more mildly understand OCD, I think they just think it's an anxiety disorder, which
sure,
again is not wrong, but
mhm,
there's so, at least for me, again, there's so many different elements that I had to learn aside from just resisting compulsions. And I think that's
right,
interesting because again, it's so personal and different for every person.
yeah, and I think when you talk about the fact that people can be OCD about certain things and they can feel like they need to, well, that's what they say is, "I'm so OCD, I gotta have my room clean and this and that and all this stuff."
Hmm.
And you go into depth about, well, actually, it's so much more. I don't trust myself. It is the doubting disorder where you start to overthink
Yeah,
every aspect of yourself and every choice you make to the point where you just cycle and go crazy on it.
definitely.
Um, did you feel like you learned once you got the diagnosis of OCD? You're 16 years old, you get diagnosed.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that changed anything for you? Was that something like, oh, like now this is like a label and I can work with it? Or do you think that
Yeah.
made it a little bit worse for you? What do you think?
That's a good question. I don't remember being too phased by it, because I think if anything it's like, okay, this makes sense. Like, thank
Mhm.
God it's something. And I
Yeah.
know. But to be completely honest, looking back, and obviously I didn't do this on purpose, but I wasn't using the right coping mechanisms or
Mhm.
seeking the right kind of treatment. Um, Again, I was seeing therapists that were giving me reassurance and stuff like that, which obviously nothing against them. They were amazing. But as you know,
Sure.
that's not great for OCD.
Mhm.
Um, but it really was last year, before I started my KeyToOCD page, that I was like, this is just honestly taking over my life. It's taking over so much. I just really made it my part-time job to learn everything and anything about this. And the good thing is there's so many resources, because
Mhm.
I know it's like it's so hard to afford therapy, but I'm constantly telling people there's things like podcasts, there's
Mhm.
things like Instagram, which obviously you and I both know about.
Yeah.
There's YouTube videos, and it's also nice because it's so specific too. So, like, for example, I was struggling with relationship anxiety,
Mhm.
and there's different coaches and like small businesses that focus specifically on that, which I would have never had a clue 10 years ago.
Sure.
Um, so that's really been the biggest thing. I have this notebook that it's like 60 pages long, and it's just like
Wow.
it's like my Bible. Like, it's like everything from how can I tell if it's OCD, fight or flight versus safe mode,
Mhm.
um, how to make decisions, how to know difference between intuition and OCD. Like, so,
Yeah.
and I really worked hard on that. And honestly, that's what a lot of my posts come from, um because again, that's, I mean,
Wow.
relevant, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's, I'm sure you can kind of relate to at least some of that.
Oh,
So,
absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm wondering, I mean, right off the bat, like, how do you know it's intuition versus OCD? Like, I've had that thought plenty of times because 'cause I'm like, "Wait, which one is it?" You know?
story of my life. Another
It's
thing, I don't want to cut you off, but
no, no.
just while we're on that really quickly,
Mhm,
I personally really struggle with decision making, and
mhm.
it's not not decisions like what am I going to have for dinner or when should I go to Target. It's like
Yeah.
decisions that I'm convinced can affect my life. So, for
Mhm.
example, like choosing to date was for the longest time so strenuous for me because it's like, is that the right word?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was like super difficult for me because I would literally just be dating someone for like 2 months and be like, "Oh my god, is this the person I'm supposed to be with?" Everyone is always talking about how they have butterflies and how when
Mhm.
you know, and I'm like, "But I don't know, and is that
Yeah.
okay?" Um, and to be honest, that's another thing that played a huge role in me jumping into therapy when I was young as well because, for example, um choosing a college when it
Mhm.
came to that time was
It's like the
uh,
endless puzzle.
it
How do
was
we do
like
this?
you would have thought it was the end of the world. It was
Yeah.
just like and it was so interesting because I've noticed going off that conversation of is it intuition or OCD, I feel like I deep down always know what I want,
Mhm,
but the OCD is so strong and convincing that I don't want that. And I've also noticed that I'm constantly stuck between what I want to do and what I should do.
mhm,
So it's like that with things like choosing a college. I freelance in my career. So I'm constantly having to choose jobs. And sometimes I get offered two jobs at once. So, like,
mhm.
which one do I want to do, but which one helps me pursue my career better? And
Right.
as you know, it just comes with practice, and thank God I'm no longer in that place I was in
Mhm.
2012, but,
Sure.
yeah, I think it's just I'm curious if you relate to this, but I think at least for me, it has taken me away from myself to the point where I'm like, I don't even know what I want, or sometimes even
Oh,
who
yeah.
I am.
1000%. Yeah.
Mm,
It's like that's some like, I always thought that I had a hard time making decisions because well, it's normal to have a hard time making decisions, I think. I think we all think to a certain extent, "Well, what's right for me, and, how do I
sure,
feel?"
yeah,
But I think if you have OCD, it's just, like, 10 times worse because you're just, like you're stuck. You literally feel like you can't move regardless, and so I
mm,
felt that all the time, growing up, and sometimes I still do. And as somebody who runs his own business, like, I know you're in entertainment, right?
mm,
And I'm in
mhm,
music, it's the same thing where it's like, well, do I take this job because it's better for me or do I take this one because I actually wanna do this one? You
yeah.
know?
And
It's
you're also
tough.
presenting yourself with ultimatums because you're like, if I don't take this job, it might be my only chance in the music industry and I'll never
Right.
get a chance again.
Mhm.
Or, you know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not, you can't possibly know that.
No, it's
But
black and
again,
white
it's
thinking.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. That is absolutely what
yeah.
I used to struggle with in so many different elements.
And
Uh,
so for you, like somebody who's been down that road, and I know it's when you have OCD, it's kind of always there on some level, but it's,
mhm,
at least personally, like I'd say like I'm 80 to 85% um good most of the time, you know what I mean? Like I don't like I'm not
awesome.
thinking I'm pretty be able to live a pretty normal life. For you, do you feel like you have like a pretty heavy duty toolbox, so to say, with how you deal with decision making?
I still a work in progress.
Mhm.
But dealing with OCD in general, I feel much stronger about. I'm still not perfect, and I'm
Sure.
probably won't ever be that way, which is fine. I'm not striving for that. But it sounds kind of funny. Like on the outside, my Instagram page probably looks like I'm like a professional and I'm trying to educate people, but the truth is that I'm still trying to educate myself. Like
Mhm.
it sounds funny, but I obviously make my own posts, so like I know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about, I feel like,
Yeah.
but I have to go on my own page sometimes and be like reminding myself of like this is how you deal with this or this
Mhm.
is a compulsion or whatever. So that's like that's the other beauty of having this page, in addition to connecting with others and helping others, is that I'm helping myself.
Yeah.
Because the other thing with writing this massive notebook was like, how am I going to sit here and read a 70-page book every day?
Mhm.
Because I
Yeah.
want it like impaled in my mind, but I want it to be like a fun way, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
It sticks better too.
for sure. Yeah.
But you're not alone in that because I'm the same way. I'm not a professional. I'm not, a therapist. Like I
Mm.
have a podcast to raise awareness on OCD, talk to people like you who can relate and who have a story with OCD and really learn more about myself and the people that I love who have it. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really important thing. And there's so much to be said about this this thing that we do, on social media talking about OCD and sharing that because like I said, I've learned so much just by reading posts like yours and by connecting with
Mm.
creators who have, lived experience. I've learned so much that I wish I knew as a teenager and as a kid.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's what I'm trying to be, is I'm trying to kind of be my own big sister. Like,
Yeah,
you know, um, but no, I appreciate that. I'm glad my stuff is helping people, because that's the whole point. Um,
absolutely. And you talked
yeah.
about you had therapy and as a teenager and she kind of um reinforced those cycles. Do you do you mind if I ask, are you still going to therapy? Are you with, like, a different therapist or
So I'm currently not in therapy. I
Mhm.
was seeing an OCD specialist for a little bit, and she's amazing. I think she's a genius. And I actually think she told me that her son struggles with OCD. So I'm like,
Mm,
great. Like this is in my opinion the best kind of therapist, with like
mhm.
lived experience.
Yes.
Because it's great, don't get me wrong, that other people are trying to understand you, but it's there's only so much you can explain. And I know they go to school and all that. They're professionals, but it just felt more of a safety zone for me. Um but as of now, I feel like I have it under control. Um, so, just kind of taking it day by day. But how about you? Are you in
Good.
therapy?
I am, yes, my therapist I've been with for 6 years.
Great.
I think 6 years, 5 or 6 no, 6. And,
Good.
she's incredible, and she really has just opened my eyes up to just thought patterns and how to really not get involved with your thoughts, and I've never really been taught that, I think, up until that point. It's one thing for me to have someone who knows what they're talking about, it's another thing to be able to know that there's a connection there and that I can
Yeah.
fully
Yeah.
trust you and you can fully trust so that is something that was really important to me, and I think because I've been through so many therapists in my life, I really wasn't, thrilled about having to find a new one because I had been through with a lot of
Mm.
therapists, and none of them were, even close to being able to help with OCD, and I wasn't
Mm.
aware of that either,
Yeah.
but
That's a good
starting with
point.
someone yeah.
No, that's a good point, because it can be the whole thing about mental health in general is it can be really hard to admit that you need help
Mhm.
and then actually go out and seek the help. But
Right.
and it's also like, seeing a therapist can kind of be like dating, where it takes a few to find the good ones. You know what I mean? Like I had a therapist that had a very like tough love approach, which I thought I liked, but as we started working together, it wasn't great for me. But I totally
Mhm.
see why that could work awesome for someone else.
Right.
So yeah, I totally get you. And
Yeah.
obviously it's worth it when you do have that connection. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people just try it once and they're like, that didn't work for me. But it's like,
Right.
just push yourself a little more.
Yeah.
There's a good
Yeah.
one, I promise.
Yeah. I've had the same kind of experience with people telling me the same thing where they're like, "Oh, I tried" this doesn't even have to appeal to OCD, it could be with anything else, but it's like they'll be like, "Yeah, I
Definitely.
tried once and it's not for me." It's like, "No, trust me, I've had therapists that I'm like, no, this ain't it.'" And I've
Yeah.
had therapists where I'm like, "How did I not know about you before?" You know?
Mhm. Yeah, and
So
don't get me wrong, like, therapists, I think, are amazing. They're, like, doing God's work. They're like,
yeah.
we need them.
Yeah.
but yeah, it's again, it's just like having a connection with someone, whether it's a friend or
Mhm.
someone you're dating, and yeah, it's I don't
Sorry.
sorry.
No, I don't mean to I
That's
don't
it.
mean to cut you off. No, I don't mean
No,
to
you're
cut you off, but I am curious because you had talked about your relationship OCD, and you talked about how you even, like, dating someone for 2 months, you'd be like, "Oh, are they the one? Like, I need to know what's going on here," and
God, yeah.
not really having that feeling that's sometimes it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes a while to build,
Yeah.
right? Tell me more about the anxiety and OCD around dating and kind of how you evolved with that and dealt with that, because I feel like I've had that for quite some time, and I
Mm.
never recognized it probably until recently that I had,
Oh,
relationship OCD
interesting.
on that level.
That's interesting. So, yeah, so the first person I ever dated, I was 19, and it's funny that you say you didn't notice because I definitely noticed it.
Yeah.
It was consuming every second of my life, and
Mhm.
it was very much like again, it goes back to the decision making aspect. And I feel like when you're dating someone, you're constantly making that decision. Even if you're just staying with them, you're
Mhm.
indirectly making the decision of being with them. And I saw the ultimatum of if I stay with this person, I'm either going to marry them or we're going to break up. And both
Mhm.
situations are scary. Like,
Yeah.
marriage is in addition to kids, like that's a
Yeah.
lifelong commitment. Obviously, you can always get
Mhm.
divorced, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
But so even if there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with the relationship I was in, I would constantly be like, should we break up? Are we supposed to break up? I don't know if and I was
Mhm.
so focused on that. And so, for example, we would make plans to like get together for Thanksgiving. And in the back of my mind, I'd be like, well, hopefully we're still together by then. And it'd
Mhm.
be like 2 weeks away. And
Yeah.
it's like hearing this, you're probably like, as an outsider who doesn't have OCD, you would probably be like, wow, she can't commit at all. But it
So not the case,
no, I know it's like
you
the
know?
opposite where I'm so committed and I care, like I'm way too into
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
adding way too many too much stress on this.
Yes.
But
Yes.
so yeah, I got honestly very depressed from that. I was just overthinking that same thing for like a year straight.
Yep.
And I actually broke up with the person because
Mhm.
I couldn't take it anymore. Or
Mhm.
I thought I couldn't. And I just simply didn't know how to be in a relationship and also have OCD. I thought it was just kind of like one thing or the other. Um, and again, like things like movies and your friends, they're always saying things like, well, if you're in the right relationship, you wouldn't be feeling this way or you wouldn't be having doubts. So again, it goes back to like adding meaning to every intrusive thought you have.
Right.
Um, but then, so yeah, dating has dating has been tough for me. Um,
Yeah.
and it was kind of the same thing when I met my current boyfriend, and I added so much pressure to our differences.
Mhm.
And um, to be honest, I feel pretty much fully through relationship OCD.
Mhm.
And I know now, like, who cares about those differences? You know what I mean? Like, we work well
Sure.
together and we treat each other well. And like,
Mhm.
that's the golden ticket. But again, I added so much meaning to if they see life this way or if they think this way, does it mean this? Again, the black and white thinking, um, and kind of trying to, I guess, protect myself of like,
Yes.
is this a sign that we're not compatible? Like, might as well get out of it now so you won't be as heartbroken as if it happens in 2 years.
Right.
Um, and to be honest, God bless my dad. I have gone to him so much for reassurance and
Mhm.
you know, my dad lives across the country and he's met this guy a few times. We've been together for 4 years. Like they have
Wow.
I'm very thankful they have a relationship, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, he doesn't spend every day with him like I do, but he's still like, "This guy's amazing, just chill."
Yeah.
Which obviously sometimes you just need to hear no
Yeah,
matter what you're dealing with, but,
right. Regardless if it's reassurance or not, you just need to hear something
yeah.
that's good for your heart.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I'm curious because I know you said you've had relationship OCD as well. And
Mhm.
my biggest thing, I'm curious if you can relate to this, but my biggest thing was the things that like in my relationship that I would see as flaws,
Yep,
I would think if he were my friend, I literally would not care about this.
yep,
And so I feel like that's a sign that this doesn't matter. And again, it
right.
goes back to like you're nitpicking, right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm,
are they not athletic enough? Are they
mhm.
like, is their hair too messy? You know
Right,
what I mean? Like,
right. You're just going
it's
down
not
that
even
rabbit
things
hole.
that it's yeah, exactly. It's not even
Yeah.
things that really always matter, but it
Mhm.
it feels like the most important thing in the world.
Right. Yeah, no,
And
I
I'm sure you can
understand.
relate to that.
Yeah, because you're looking that is a compulsion where you're looking for that side to almost, like, validate what you're that the things you're thinking about are real and true.
Yeah.
And, my
Yeah.
relationship OCD was more so, coexistent with my existential OCD because I found comfort in my partner during my existential OCD, and so
Okay.
then I became really afraid that I wasn't gonna have her anymore.
To be honest, I don't really know much about existential OCD at all.
Yeah, it's I mean, just like any subtype, they're all based off of, fearing something that, of course, goes against your nature or your being or whatever it is,
Okay.
and so I think it's the same kind of thought process of, like, those questions that you can't find answers to, you just will never find the answers to, like, I was questioning,
Hmm.
who am I? Like, if I'm not my name or my job or, you know, um, the people I love, like, who am I? If I'm constantly changing,
Wow.
what can I lean on to be consistent? And there's really no answer to that. Like your awareness, if you want to go down like a Buddhistic uh teaching, like your awareness is the only thing that really is consistent while you're alive. Everything else changes. So it's
Hmm.
hard to put yourself into like a box into who you are. So I was dealing with that kind of existential um thought process and like what's the meaning, like why are we doing all the things that we're doing. Like I remember getting a text message in the car on the way to get some ice cream, and someone else was driving. I don't remember who was driving, but I got a
Hmm.
message. I opened it and I remember thinking like, why am I even responding to this text? Like why am I even reading this text and responding to it? Like we're all going to be dead anyway in 30,000 years when the sun
Wow.
explodes. Like it was that
Huh.
deep where I was like it was so existential that I was just terrified because I had no idea who I was, right? And I had no idea what the purpose and meaning of any of this was because I couldn't
Hmm.
find a solid answer. Um, and so in that time, the girlfriend that I was with at the time, she did a lot of reassurance for me, which I didn't recognize, and she didn't recognize that either.
Mm.
But she made me feel safe, and she had her own existential crisis, which is why I felt safe with her. And, at
Oh,
that
okay.
point, that's when I started to have that relationship OCD where I was like, "Oh my god, like, what if I'm not actually in love with her? Or what if I'm,
Mm.
like,
Yep.
having all these things, and it's like, what if I only love her because I feel comfortable?" And, like, having just questions that you would normally ask yourself, but because I was so afraid to lose her, and I really did, like, love and care about her so much, that was when it
Yeah.
became also, like, it really existed with my existential OCD. But, I mean, even,
Mm.
there was tendencies of that even when I was younger throughout my life.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I feel like they can intertwine, and
Mhm.
it's interesting how it comes up because it's like for me, compulsions compulsions are I didn't know compulsions could be mental. I thought they were just physical. So for example, when I was dealing with the contamination OCD and checking, it was obvious that the compulsion is you just check the stove, don't do it again. Like trust yourself that it's off and you
Mhm.
did the right thing. Um, but I did not have a clue until probably last year that there's mental compulsions like ruminating and seeking reassurance, which seeking reassurance can be so sneaky.
Mhm.
I still catch myself doing it to this day because it's not always directly, what do you think? Or do you like this person? Or
Right.
can you check that? Like it's it can even, I feel like it can even be like worrying what other people think.
Oh,
Um
100%. Or, like, when you're in a relationship, like, just kissing the person and checking to see how you feel after you kiss them. I
yeah,
mean,
that's a good one.
it's another compulsion.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I'm curious how you felt you've like overall gotten through your OCD because again, mine was a lot of compulsion resisting and it still
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
But mine was also just a lot of learning.
Yep.
And so like for example, with the relationship OCD, like learning that no, normal relationships are hard. And
Mhm.
normal relationships are not like you're kissing for the first time and the whole world makes sense and there's butterflies and rainbows and whatever.
Right.
But and it's also a big thing I learned was that relationships are like waves. So like there's going to be times when you're like, "Oh my god, I'm so in love." And then there's times when you're going to be like, "Get away from me."
Right.
So the times when I wanted to kind of be more by myself and like didn't want to be as clingy, I was like, "Oh my god, I just see this guy as a friend."
Mhm.
But it's just again, it's like learning from relationship experts on Instagram and stuff like that have helped me so much because I'm like, "Oh,
Mhm.
what you see on Instagram or in real life of other couples is not truly what's always happening."
Right. It's a highlight reel.
You're getting a glimpse of like a whole, relationship.
Mhm.
So that's
Not
helped me a
even.
lot. I don't know if there's anything that's helped you besides resisting compulsions, but I'm curious.
Yeah. That's I mean, I'm never I'm not cured of OCD. It's still very prevalent in my life.
Yeah.
Mainly, I think, the way that I operate as a creative, it's very prevalent in how I operate, but also, um, my contamination OCD is still there. It's not nearly as bad as it was when I was younger.
Mm,
But I think for me, a combination of therapy, medication, and, um, resisting those compulsions
mm,
mixed in with Instagram, to be honest, like, really learning and seeing the content that other people are posting really has helped me tremendously to learn about what I should be looking out for, what I shouldn't be looking out for.
yeah.
Um,
Mindfulness.
yeah, yeah, and I know meditation itself and mindfulness isn't, just a one fix all kind of thing, but it's the practice that's underneath it, which is allowance and just allowing whatever to come in and leave when it leaves.
Mm,
And I just did an episode a couple weeks ago about just emotions, and I think our thoughts can move the same way if we just allow the thoughts to be there, and if we allow emotions to be there without having to do something all the time.
mm,
That's a huge token to take with you, I think, when it comes to OCD, and no matter what subtype you're dealing with, like if you're dealing with contamination or existential or relationship or whatever it is,
mm.
if you can just be like, I'm having a thought, and just allowing the thought to be what it is without trying to fix it or act out in any way. It's so hard to do, but I
Yes.
think like the practice of that is what has helped me.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's again, it comes in waves. Sometimes practice like the more you practice, the easier it gets. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not easy, but that doesn't mean, I was just telling my mom today, like a big thing I learned was that recovery isn't linear. Like it's okay if you feel great for 6 months and then all of a sudden you're like, I feel back to square one. And I had
Mhm.
no clue that was random. That was normal. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. Um
No, it's so true though. So
but
true.
it is true because I, for the hardest time, would eventually kind of like relapse and go back to what I felt was square one. And it's like, oh, all that progress went down the drain. It's like, no, 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 that's not how that works.
No.
And that helped me a ton realizing that because obviously you can be down on yourself and
Mhm.
um, it's just kind of, it's like for me, it's a different battle every day. Sometimes it doesn't show up for a week. Sometimes it's unpacking its bags and vacationing in my mind for 2 weeks. So it's
Right.
just, I don't
It
know.
depends. It depends. It's that's the thing too, is you're also not that 16-year-old girl who was just figuring out what it is that she's dealing with. You know, like
Mm,
you have tools, you have resources, people, these are all things that you didn't have at square one necessarily the way that you have them now. And I think that's also something important to recognize, because we
for sure.
we are never truly at square one when we hit a roadblock.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for like do your homework, learn
Mhm.
from people, go to therapy. Um like I'm curious, and obviously don't answer this if this is too personal, but like I'm curious what you talk to your therapist about in terms of like not specifically, but like what
Sure.
what she helps you with. Like does she kind of remind you of like here are your tools or
Mhm.
um
I've talked to my therapist about everything and anything. My therapist does not reassure me. It's never like a means to an end when we have a conversation.
okay.
It's always, you know, bouncing back to like, well, these are your options. Which one are you going to choose?
Mm,
Um, what do you think about this? Or it's never, she's never really given me reassurance or advice on what I should do. I think a lot of it has been her method for me has been helping myself build trust with myself,
mm,
and really having some compassion for myself, because I was very, very hard on myself growing up with this. And I
oh,
never gave
interesting.
myself like
A
the
break.
grace or the break to realize like, hey, like you're a human being with a brain and this isn't easy, and you don't have to know the answers all the time as much as you think you should.
That's a very good point. I think, dealing with this as a 29-year-old girl, like it's hard. And again, it's different every
Mhm.
day, but thinking about when I was 12 and didn't know I had this, it's like that girl's a freaking rock star.
Yeah.
Like that is I think again, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, people don't realize just how debilitating it is.
Yeah.
I think it's it's just it's misunderstood, and
Mhm.
obviously that's why we're doing this podcast. But
Yeah, which I'm so grateful to be able to have people like such as yourself to come on here and talk about your personal experience, because this is really, I mean, if we get value out of social media and podcasts and things of that nature, I'm sure there's other people who do as well.
yeah.
So the goal for this thing is to get people to understand it better, and also to help people who are struggling. And I did have a question for you in terms of the timeline, because
Mm,
we talked about your teen years and getting diagnosed, and now you're 29 years old,
mm,
and you've had all this, you know, this journey really of unpacking this. Do you How, like, throughout your 20s, and we talked prior, you had moved out to the West Coast.
mm.
Throughout your 20s and, moving and kind of being on your own and doing your own thing, how was OCD in terms of like that whole journey?
It's funny that you asked that. I feel like it was very selective because
Mhm.
I kind of I kind of feel like I always knew I wanted to be here, and it's like it was so strong that it was to the point that like there's no other option for me. Like to
Mhm.
be honest, I when I was graduating from college, I only applied to one job and it was out
Wow.
here, which
Wow.
I don't recommend. Always have a backup plan.
That's
But
funny.
yeah, it was out here. I I admire my high school self because I was going through this OCD stuff, but at the same time, I truly feel like I was the most confident version of myself. And I'm sure you can relate to this, but there were OCD was and still kind of is very selective about what it attacks. So for
Yeah.
example, it never it never came after my career. I can
Same.
tell you that I would, again, I told you earlier that I constantly have to make decisions regarding my career, and I would have so much confidence and be like, "Oh, this is the obvious right answer. I'm going to do this. And honestly, as of lately, I've been having a hard time with it.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because it's like, why did this come up 8 years into my career, but
Yeah.
not when I first moved here and literally didn't know a soul and
Mhm.
moved here by myself. And it was my first time away from my family and whatever. Um,
How old were you when you moved there?
I was 22, 21.
Wow, okay. Spent
Yeah.
some time.
Yeah. So it's dramatic, right? Like
Mhm.
I mean, people move away from home all the time and I give them so much credit. I constantly
Absolutely.
am like, I think you just in life should leave your hometown, even if it's just for a year,
Mhm.
gain some experience, learn about yourself. My biggest thing was I learned how to be alone in a healthy way
Mhm.
because uh, I was working on a show and I would, come home and I was like Airbnb-ing with a woman and she didn't speak English very well. So and again, it was my first time away from my family across the freaking country. So it's just, but again, it was healthy. Like it definitely wasn't easy.
Mhm.
Um, I was terrified. And I definitely remember my dad came out here to like drop me off. And I was like, you don't have to go if you don't want to. And he's like, I
Stay with
definitely have to
me.
go back to
Yeah.
work. But, um, but I'm very thankful that OCD didn't take away
Mhm.
that bravery. And I'm proud to say that just in general, no matter how much OCD I've had, I'm a fighter and I've
Mhm.
never let it uh like make me miss out on something,
Mhm.
whether it's a relationship or moving across the country. And I'm very proud of that. And even again, my first relationship was so hard on me, but I pushed through for a year or two. And even a counselor I was seeing was like, this ain't worth it.
Yeah,
Because as you know, nothing's worth putting your mental health on the line. But
absolutely.
um,
I find that just that's good that you recognize that in yourself, but also
mm,
too to love something and have a vision for something, and OCD doesn't affect that, like your career. I
yeah,
understand because at the core of it, you can have OCD show up. Like I have it show up in my creative and which job to do and what should I do, what's best for this. But it never
yeah.
made me question, well, do I want to be an artist and producer? Never.
Which is
And
interesting, right? Because it makes
yeah.
you think, like, for example, with the relationship OCD, I
Hmm.
should be as confident with this person that I am with my career if I am in the right career, quote unquote.
Right. Right.
But again, it's not black and white. It's not
Hmm.
if you're having doubts about a person, that means they're wrong. It's just,
Right.
you know,
It's part of OCD on top of the fact that it's also really part of relationships. Like I don't
yeah,
really know anybody who hasn't had those kind of thoughts, and if they say they haven't, I think they're full of bullshit. But
yeah, true.
that's just my perspective on it. But I think it's like we're also fed the fact, the not the fact, we're fed the lies of like um oh, like, it's so black and white with relationships. You shouldn't feel like this, you should feel like this, or, when you know. And I'm sure maybe it's
Mm,
like that for a select few, but I don't know anybody who just knew right off the bat. And if there is anybody
mhm.
who just knew, I'd love to know about, their experience. But
Yeah,
anybody in my life, nobody in my life just knew that they wanted to marry someone or be with someone until until they got to a point where they made the choice to be with this person.
yeah, and you're right. And again, like learning that reality made me more comfortable. I
Yeah,
think movies especially like set you up for disappointment or just they're not often realistic. Um, so
I agree with
uh
that. And we're also raised, raised on Disney fantasies.
for
So
sure. I um I just thought of something, but
sure.
I can't remember now, of course.
No, that's fine. If it
But
comes up, just pop in. But I was gonna go somewhere with that. In terms of now in your life and you're, coming up on your 30s. I'm turning 30 this month and I'm just like, on one hand I'm terrified, on the other hand I'm excited. I'm like, "Oh, I'm still young." Like it's almost like when you're present and you realize like, "Oh, wait, like I'm 30 and I'm young and I'm here." It's almost like you
Mm,
time traveled to like this moment and you're like, "Oh, I'm enjoying it."
yeah.
Um, do you ever have, moments where you're present and you're thinking about your life and you're excited and about the
Hmm.
future, or excited about where you are, even though OCD kind of has its tactics and there's ways that it kind of pops in and out of your life? Do you ever feel like you're getting those moments of excitement in your life?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm like anyone else, I'm curious where my life is going.
Hmm.
Um, I I've realized overall with OCD that I, as you know, you're trying to control something that can't be controlled, such as the future. And I often fear just things in life that are going to happen or are meant to happen. And I'm convinced I can't handle it,
Hmm.
which obviously isn't true. Um, and a big thing for me personally that has helped me is kind of like reviving my faith in God.
Hmm.
Um, like for example, there was a job recently that I really wanted and I didn't end up getting it. And I was really disappointed. Obviously, I'm human, but I was like, okay, it's not meant to be. I don't know the reason yet, but God doesn't want me there right now.
Hmm.
Um, and so I do get excited about the future. I get nervous as
Hmm.
we get older. It feels like I don't know if you can relate to this, but it feels like there's more pressure
Oh
of
yeah.
like, when are you getting married? Are you having kids? You better have kids. You're going to be an old mom. Like, you know what I mean?
When are you going to get a
um,
house in this market?
for sure, for sure. Just so much like, how do I do my taxes?
Yeah. Yeah, I just did them
But
yesterday. That was fun.
good, good job because I'm
Yeah.
pushing mine off.
As a
Um,
freelancer, it's hard.
taxes or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
I
for
mean,
sure.
everything is hard as a freelancer, but I think,
Oh
uh,
God, I'm sure yours are 10 times worse than mine because
they're fun, yeah.
I at least like work for companies. I don't know if you
Mm.
do, but
I
so
do, like,
luckily,
freelance work, yeah. Like
okay,
writing for companies, yeah.
okay. I didn't
Yeah.
know if like you were kind of like it like as a sole proprietor doing work for other people. So I'm like, okay, at
Yeah.
least they still do their homework and they get
Yeah.
me the W-2s or whatever.
Yeah.
But
It's interesting too, you said you restored your faith 'cause, did you lose your faith along the way?
yeah,
Mhm.
I think so. I think to be honest, I uh there was a point where my OCD was so bad that I actually would pray at night that I
Mhm.
wouldn't wake up. To be
Sure.
honest,
Sure.
I wasn't actively doing anything to
Mhm.
no longer be here,
Right.
but I just was suffering that much and I really wanted a break or peace
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
And I think I just definitely had a moment and this I don't know how long this lasted. Maybe like a couple years, but I definitely was like I don't know if I believe in God because I don't know if he would put me through this
Mhm.
basically.
Sure.
Um which obviously I now know is not like he's out to get you or like he did this to me, you know what I mean?
Right, right.
It's just the person that I'm meant to be and we all have flaws. And again, like I'm weirdly thankful for my OCD because it's
Mhm.
led me to meet people like you and help people like these people on Instagram. It looks like people who follow me are from all over the world, which is great. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm proud of that. And I actually have thought about going back to school to pursue something in this
Wow.
field just because I kind of feel like in a way it's my duty because it's like I
Mhm.
love talking to people. Again, I have lived experience and
Mhm.
I overall want to help people. And that's been very
Sure.
obvious since I was like 10. It doesn't matter if it's OCD. I just love like connecting with people.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you said that because I had Ali, Garza, who was on the
Mm.
podcast a few weeks ago, and she talked about how this is, like, one of the sectors of mental health that has the most, um, people with lived experience helping others, in terms of,
Oh,
like,
wow.
OCD. So, like, a lot of providers, people who are helping others with OCD have either A, gone through it themselves or have a loved one who has.
Mm.
So it's one, I think, honestly, I think it was rated like within the top 10 of like worst mental or like disorders to have like in
Yeah,
life.
it's in the World Health Organization. It's like the top, it's in the top 10 most debilitating
Right.
illnesses, including physical, like including like
Yeah.
MS or something.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
crazy because you're like,
Yeah.
we're freaking awesome. We're getting
Yeah.
through this.
Yeah. But that's how much it impacts people, is the fact that you get to the other side. Some of us get to the other side and we look back and we're like, okay, we need to help everybody else cross the pond too, because this is just this needs to be talked about. We need to bring more awareness to the table because
Yeah.
it really is challenging.
No, to be honest, I don't know about you, but I didn't talk to anybody. Like literally, like when
Really.
I was in high school, I don't, I could be wrong, but I don't think my best friend even knew what I was
Wow.
going through. And it's not even like because I was ashamed. It's not anything to do with that. It's just I think it's just you automatically assume people won't understand.
Mhm.
And I think just in general, like I'm so thankful that mental health in general is spreading more awareness and people are talking about it more because I don't know about you, but back in the day, I used to constantly deal with people telling me like, "Oh, go for a walk," or "Why don't you try yoga?" And
Right.
it's like, to be honest, yoga is probably the last thing I want to do
Yeah.
because it makes me like really focus on my thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And like I
Yeah.
personally thrive when I'm busy and am running around at work and whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I'm curious, like, is that something you've had to deal with?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, nobody knew that I had this besides my parents and my
Mm,
family, and even the things that I dealt with throughout my teens, I didn't realize were subject to OCD. Like, I thought OCD was just like everybody else, cleanliness and organization. Like, I was diagnosed
mm.
with it, but I didn't actually realize the intensity of what it was until I was 19 and my physician was like, "Yeah, these things that you're dealing with, they're OCD." And I was like, "What?"
Oh, your physician told you.
My
That's
Yeah.
not very common, I don't think.
Very uncommon,
Huh.
yeah. So it was really,
Wow.
really, and like I said, I had went through so many therapists as a young kid who, like, none of them really knew what or how to really treat OCD, or even the stuff that they wouldn't tell me
Mm,
like, "Oh, that's your OCD." It was just like kind of reassurance and just talk therapy, right?
yeah.
Um,
Well, it makes sense in a
yeah.
way because as an anxious disorder, like your first instinct is when someone's having anxiety about like going on a roller coaster,
Mhm.
the first instinct you have is to reassure them that, oh, it's
Mhm.
not that bad. It's only 20 seconds long.
Right.
Like everyone loves it. You know what I mean? So it
Mhm.
makes sense that that's the first thing you want to do. To be honest, when people DM me, like that's what I want to do. I want to
I
just be like,
know.
oh my God, let me give you a virtual hug
Mhm. I
and
know.
tell you everything's going to be okay.
I know, but
um,
it just continues the cycle, and I didn't realize that until I was in my mid-20s,
mm,
and so I'm still very much in the same place, I think, um, as you say that you are, in terms of still learning about your OCD and spreading awareness and connecting with other people, and
yeah.
it's a wonderful thing, I think, to be on this side and say, "Okay, like, there's so much I know now I didn't know before," but you're right. I mean, I didn't talk to many people about it because you don't, and it's not a shameful thing. It was just like, "Oh, they won't understand," or, there was one point where I thought everybody thought like me, and that was when I was very young, and then as I got
Yeah.
into my teens, I was like, "This isn't normal. This is odd."
I think that's what I accepted too, which I think is another reason why I didn't talk to people so much at first. I think I
Mhm.
was just like, oh, this is like something only I do.
Right.
Um, but yeah, eventually, obviously, I would confide in my parents. I would cry to my parents. Like
Sure.
they did the best they could. They,
Mhm.
understandably, I don't think knew why is she worried about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
yeah, I mean, it's like it's just one of those things where it's like it's been a crazy journey, but I really truly feel like I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, it's obvious to be like, why me or like why do I have this or
mhm.
whatever, but again, it's weirdly like made me a better person.
Mhm.
And I've noticed that as I get older, like it's sending me in a different path in terms of like my priorities and a possible career change and stuff like that. So,
I get it. And I was gonna ask you to segue into that, the page that you started for OCD, what is your hope in terms of like, growing the page and being able to raise awareness? Like, you
mm,
started this last year. Do you have like goals with the page that you want to do?
um, to be honest, I'll always have a goal. Like
Hmm.
I'll always, my goal was to hit 500 followers, which I did
Hmm.
last week. So it's
Congratulations.
good. Thank you. It's good to always set like, little reachable goals rather than necessarily one large goal. There's no
Hmm.
wrong way to do it, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
But I feel like just I'm curious where it's going to take me. And I feel like for now, I just like, having my DMs open if people need someone to talk to,
Hmm.
and just again spreading awareness, because I actually, like you, I was promoting my page on my personal page,
Hmm.
and it's kind of like I was like, oh, this is a good idea, because again, it's so misunderstood and so many
Hmm.
people from work follow me and whatever, but there's actually like a large percentage of my number that is from personal people that I know, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. And between that and talking to people in person, so many people have come up to me and said, I think I have it, or I have
Hmm.
it for sure.
Yep.
um and it's just, I
That's
don't
a
know,
beautiful thing,
it's
I think.
yeah, no, for sure.
I
Definitely.
think that's great, and I'm excited to see more, more posts from you and kind of where you come from in terms of what you post and who you connect with and grow the page and stuff, because I think the more it grows, the more people are hearing about it and they're trying to learn and understand about OCD.
Mm.
Um, so I think, in terms of the page itself, all of that, is there anything that you would like to say here, you know, on the podcast?
Ah, man, we've been saying a lot.
Yeah, we have a lot of good information in this
Yeah.
episode.
Um, no, I mean, nothing I can think of on the spot. I
Mhm.
just, like I said, I'm just trying to do what I feel like is my duty to just like spread awareness and not be ashamed and tell
Mhm.
people to talk. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to, you don't have to blast it on a podcast, but you can
Mhm.
just confide in someone or DM me. Like it's fine if you haven't even met me. It's
Yeah.
just like that's why I created the page. And again, I'm thankful that there's so many resources, because there
It's
wasn't
tough.
there wasn't always. I mean, there
Yeah.
definitely wasn't when I was 11.
Oh,
Uh,
I know that for sure. And I was talking to Sean last week, my friend. He has ERP and Me is his page. And
oh, okay. I think I
yeah,
follow them. That's funny.
yeah, and we were talking about, you know, um the mental health community, and because I'm still new to a lot of this, like I'm still unsure of what resources are out there for people. And I know the
Mm,
International OCD Foundation is there, and there's a lot of, it can be a financial commitment to get into therapy and things like that. So I'm still very
mm.
ignorant in terms of like free resources or resources in general, but just social media itself as a resource for me has been incredible.
Well,
So
yeah. That was my biggest thing too, because my when I finally did find a good therapist, she was very expensive. She has like just a very, very good resume, and she
mhm.
has more degrees than a thermometer, so she deserves that pay.
That's
But
a
it's
really cool
just
metaphor. I'm sorry.
it's a Dr. Phil quote.
Oh, that is so funny. Oh my gosh.
but
Oh man.
but it's not, it's not always affordable or like accessible in that way. And I've
Mhm.
had, consultations with even coaches, like life coaches, and uh, because it's private and like a
Mhm.
private business, they can be very expensive too. So I think that's my biggest thing is I want it to be accessible,
Yeah.
whether it's literally free or affordable,
Mhm.
or there's perks, like people nowadays have Patreon and they're like,
Sure.
just go to my Patreon for extra stuff. Like,
Mhm.
but I totally agree with you because I have friends that really want help and
Mhm.
they can't afford it.
Right.
Um,
It's a definitely a crisis in this era right now, and I'm
yeah.
glad that we're able to at least contribute our perspectives,
Mm,
and that's not, that's not a, fix all scenario, and it should never be taken in, in what's the word I'm looking for? It should never be taken in place of therapy, but I think
mm,
the information itself that is out there and the information that we're able to broadcast here, talk about our experience, that's important stuff that people should know when dealing with OCD, and
yeah.
also in their pursuit to learn more about themselves and the people they love. So I think what you're doing is incredible, and like I love the page. I'm so happy that you
Oh, thank you
surpassed
so much.
500. So
Oh,
just
thank
keep it
you.
up. Keep up the content, and
No,
I
same
love
with
the
you.
content. So
Same
thank
with
you.
you. I love podcasts. I like, if I could do anything in my life, it would be to have a talk show. So like, this is
Do it.
awesome.
Do it up.
Just start it.
Start it up on TikTok and YouTube. I mean, that's the way to go. So,
Yeah,
um, but I appreciate that. So I really appreciate you even taking the time today and just hopping on here and telling your story and sharing more about the things you've learned and where you're going with, your future. So I appreciate that
definitely.
so much. And if anybody wants to follow your page, they can find you. Is it just on Instagram, or are you
Yeah, just
everywhere?
on Instagram for now. Again, we'll see kind of how things unravel. I'm still learning stuff. I'm teaching myself stuff, but it's fun. It's just like a little side hustle that I'm doing. It's not like
Hmm.
I'm not trying to make money or something. So,
Sure.
but we'll
This is
see.
great.
We'll see what happens.
KeyToOCD, my friend Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.